Hello there, and welcome back to Ranting About Nothing. Today, I'm just gonna be randomly talking about nothing really that specific, just some things that caught my attention. I just felt like that my YouTube channel was just collecting too much digital dust, so I decided to finally just do something and just rant about something. So, let's start talking about Marvel and Disney. My feelings towards Marvel, I feel like maybe I'm just tired of the super genre, or maybe I'm just getting bored of the lack of experimentation nowadays from them. I don't know, I'm just lacking the oomph or excitement nowadays for a Marvel project. And I often feel like it's kind of bad for Marvel to be kind of owned by Disney. I do understand the whole economical thing and all that sort of stuff, and yes, it kind of helps us to have the cinematic universe. It's not quite like in the comic books. I'm looking at you, X-Men. But I feel like the danger with Disney owning it is that I feel like Disney suffers from this lack of creativity sometimes. And I know that's going to be blasphemy from some people who can say, oh, what about Zootopia? Oh, Treasure Planet. Okay, Treasure Planet was based off the book Treasure Island. Zootopia, yeah, that was kind of creative, but I think Beastars looks like it's going to do a better job on that whole maybe racism thing, because that whole thing was kind of rather iffy when you put predators in it as a substitute for, I'm not going to get into that, but anyway, as I always say about Disney is kind of better at buying people, good at creating things for them than they do it themselves. And also, come on, that Disney princesses are based on old European legends, and one based on a historical fiction. Let's just say that much. I'm not going to get into big in-depths about that whole thing. Anyway, so yeah, Marvel. I feel like one of the things that I really wanted to have from Marvel is seeing that they have already done some science fiction. Actually, something I wanted to say about Black Widow before I get to this is that I really wanted Black Widow to be more like a James Bond or a Jason Bourne kind of story. Less big explosions, big actions, and people running around and maybe shooting each other with cars, and more about espionage. Watching a scene where Black Widow is basically talking to a guy in a dangerous situation where she might get it out, but it's also highly dangerous where she could be shot at any moment if she's not careful with the right words, would be something I would more rather like to see. Maybe we might get something like that in the movie, I'm not sure. It looks like another big bang 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 Marvel explosion sort of fest, but I might be way off topic. Anyway, one thing I really would like to see from Marvel is I was going to say about the fact that a lot of their stories are in the supernatural, well, kind of fantasy realm, or mostly in sci-fi, is I would really love to see a horror line from, even though I would feel like Disney would never do that, even though they would draw a big crowd. It's just that I feel like Disney is trying to be family friendly. We can't have, horrific moments, despite the fact that you're going to put Moon Knight, who really to me feels like a bit of a horror character given his whole background. It's basically like if Batman, but basically if he was basically off his freaking mind. And that's kind of the basic of Moon Knight. There's like a whole big backstory behind him, but we're not going to get into that today. Basically, yeah, so Marvel has a lineup of horror-based characters, or characters that at least are kind of supernatural, or some other interesting characters, but I mostly want to focus on the horror, because I feel like unlike DC, I feel like DC is a lot better at basically showcasing or basically presenting its horror-themed characters, like Justice League Dark, the Constantine lineup of comics. I think it was called Hellraiser or Hell something or other, I always forget the name of that line of comics. And this is something that I really would like to see in the Marvel Universe. Anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of horrific characters I would like to see. Like I said, Werewolf by Night, which would be pretty awesome to see because there hasn't been a good werewolf movie in a long time. The Living Mummy, because mummies need way more love in the movie industry, especially the horror industry. Or we even have Frankenstein or Dracula, because they're technically part of the line. I know we're going to get Morbius the Living Vampire, but Sony, I have a lot of things to say about Sony, but not a lot of time put in this video. So yeah, there's a lot of horror comic characters, but one of the lines out of Marvel, and technically it's not all horror, but some of these characters could lend themselves to horror, was the Razor line by Clive Barker. Now, Clive Barker in this comic line, I should first say who is Clive Barker to people who don't know him. Now, if any of you have ever watched the movie Hellraiser, that was based on one of his books called The Hellbound Heart. Now, Clive Barker is an openly gay man who's most famously noted for writing horror, Especially his horror work often deals heavily with violence and sex. Not necessarily, but that tends to be his sort of key framework. Now, Hellraiser is his most well-noted film, but he has made several, well, he hasn't made the films himself, but several of his other books and several of his other sort of ideas have been turned into films. Cabal, which was one of his short stories, was turned into Nightbreed, which it's one of my favorite films, but it's not one of the best films. Definitely check it out if you're interested in a so wild, fun sort of film, which incidentally got turned into a comic along with Hellraiser. So yeah, Clive Barker basically had this line with Marvel called the Clive Barker Universe, and was called Razor line. Because, well, Clive Barker. The funny thing is that he didn't really actually write any of these comics. This was done by other writers, inked by various people. Now, he mostly basically chipped in by putting ideas and characters into this. There were 4 comics in this line. Now, the first of them was Eco Kid. Now, Eco Kid told the story about Dex, a kid who basically turned out that his father was actually a ghost. And this resulted him in not having ghost powers, at least not what I have read of the comics. I do own, I think, 2 issues of this comic, and I was quite interested in reading it. But it is mostly about him basically discovering that he has one eye that allows him to see into another reality on top of another one. In this reality where people don't see these things is where mythical creatures and creatures of legend, which I think is just basically the same thing, I'm not really sure about definitions, and creatures of both nightmare and legend exist. And he soon finds himself being chased after by several men. And this to me seems like could be a really fun movie or even as a TV series. There's a lot of interesting elements you could explore with it. However, I haven't checked out many reviews on the Clive Barker universe, but the 2 reviews I have definitely did not give high praises for either of the comics in this line. The other one is, and I have real trouble seeing it, it's due to the fact that I have a minor form of dyslexia and I am super lazy, which is, I can't say the first name, but it's basically and Hex, which was another comic basically. This was more of a Subaru comic story, though it did have some elements of horror and fantasy in it. It mostly follows a stand-up comedian who basically lives in New York, and a whole bunch of other sort of things come along. Basically machinations, playing card club symbols, and a whole bunch of other sort of stuff. I haven't read this one to say too much, but it looks like it could be interesting. The other one was Hyper Kid, which is more kind of like a bit of more of a superhero story, though it feels like it's a little bit from the 90s. About a bunch of kids who could turn into Subarus with various powers, and it looks not too bad. One, like I said, the other reviewer I checked out was talking about this one, and yeah, it did not seem like it said it was best. Like I said, one of the characters isn't that exactly original, as he can just turn into a super strong, basically angry red man, because, we don't have enough of those in comics. Even though one of the characters does have an interesting power where he can enter computers and then control them, which is a pretty interesting ability. The other one, again, is something I have trouble with the name, but this one was a superhero sort of horror-styled comic. It also looks somewhat interesting. I might want to check it out maybe sometime. But yeah, it is just kind of interesting that I have never really heard much about this universe, and it seems like a bit of a shame because there are some generally interesting ideas that I feel like this universe should be brought back. I don't know if Disney would ever want to turn them into actual movies because, well, like I said, Clive Barker is kind of famous for having sex and violence, so yeah, that would be interesting. But I would definitely like to see them on screen because, I don't know, like I said, there's some interesting potential, and I'm a believer that even the most poorly considered character or even poorly written character can always be turned into a good character with the right writers and the right vision. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about was a new